Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX and I'm Megha Sharma. Gautam Adani, the founder of Adani Group of Companies, along with his nephew Sagar Adani and others, have been indicted by Brian Peace, who's the United States attorney from the Eastern District of New York, for allegedly conspiring to bribe the government officials in India to get solar energy contracts in India. The US Department of Justice alleges that the Adani Green, including people in America, to subscribe to the bonds without informing the company, was indulging in bribes to get contracts in India. Now, this is a 54-page document that goes into minute details of what allegedly happened, which government officials from which Indian states were being targeted to provide bribes, where were the meetings being held, so on and so forth. And this indictment, the document does not once provide any evidence, concrete proof that the act of bribery actually took place. The case at best accuses, and without concrete proof, that there was conspiracy that was hatched by the Adanis to bribe the Indian officials. There is no violation of Foreign Corruption Act. Today, India's most prestigious and learned advocates, Mahesh Jethmalani and Mukul Rohatgi, who also has in the past held the position of the Attorney General of India, have spoken out against the US Department of Justice's indictment, calling it a hatchet job and sketchy at best. There is a growing concern over the scorched earth policy of the incumbent Democratic US President Joe Biden, who has ratcheted the Ukraine-Russia war, escalating it to the possible point of no return. It makes the job of the US President-elect Donald Trump all the more difficult to negotiate peace. There's something similar that is taking place against the Adani Group of Companies and India. The US Democratic deep state has time and again in the past 2 years tried every trick in the book to subvert the India growth story. And the latest act certainly looks like a hit job on India. From raising doubts on the fairness and credibility of the Indian judiciary to cornering India on Hardeep Nijjar case, the US State Department has fallen short of accusing the Indian government of conspiring the assassination of the Khalistani terrorist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu as well, who is allowed to roam freely in America despite several extradition requests by India which have gone unnoticed. It's the same story with the 26/11 terror attacks conspirators David Headley and Tahawur Rana, who are also residing in America. There are no two doubts that America is playing the super cop. It somehow gives itself unilateral jurisdiction over everything that's happening across the globe. What credibility does the American judiciary have to act as the super cop? Let's start this conversation. Joining me on the telecast is Advocate Atmaram Nandkarni. He's the former ASG. Thank you very much for joining me. And the question that I want to ask from you, sir, is about what our learned senior advocates Mukul Rohatgi and Mahesh Jethmalani said today. What are the actual charges that are being made by the New York prosecutor?
Yeah, that's the question?
Yes.
Now, basically, I've gone through this 54 pages document which I've got, which is actually the indictment by the US court. Frankly, it's like a charge sheet which is filed, akin to a charge sheet or a complaint charge which is filed in our courts in India. The irony is, I've been reading in the newspapers and public domain about Adani being indicted and all that. Curiously enough, neither Mr. Adani nor his nephew nor that other fellow, Mr. Jain, has been indicted in count number 1 and count number 5. Count number 1 relates to, the bribing of officials, etc., conspiracy of bribing and all. And 5 relates to obstructing justice. If they are not there on 1 and 5, where is the question of, charging them for 2, 3 and 4? This is the mute legal question.
Right.
I mean, number 2, as you know very well, the document itself says that this is only an indictment, this is not a conviction, etc. So this is only a prima facie.
Right.
Probably the US Department of Justice has filed something before the court, and this is like a summons or a warrant which the Indian court also issues. So this is not something indictment in the sense that any court has indicted them or anybody.
Okay.
So this is only a prima facie view.
Do you think, in your opinion, has the New York City prosecutor managed to establish a locus standi, or is it just a fishing expedition, as you mentioned, whether there is actually a locus standi in the matter?
No, see, insofar as his locus standi is concerned, that's a very relative question. He may have the locus standi to file such kind of things. But the first thing is, Mr. Adani has not been charged under count number 1 and 5. How could he be charged under 2, 3, 4? The second question is, what is the evidence and what is the substratum pleaded? What is the overt court act attributed to the accused? When you say a bribe is given, you must say that Mr. X has bribed Mr. Y on such a date at such a place, and this is the amount. You can't just say X has bribed Y or somebody has bribed someone. Neither the officials are mentioned nor the departments are mentioned.
Okay. All right. So when the indictment says that Sagar Adani made notes and held meetings, how is that not a bribery charge?
No,
is it just a technicality that we are discussing right now?
Why is he not charged? Why is he not charged for count number 5 or count number 1?
Right. Absolutely.
Without charging him for 1 and 5, you could not charge him for this.
Okay, then
it's very easy to say, that so and so persons are bribed and all this, etc. But very difficult to prove such a case.
Okay, all right. So again, in your opinion, there are legal precedents that already exist for charges being made in New York City, or do you think this smacks of a hit job?
No, charges being made in New York City is for, that's a matter to be established at the trial, whether the court had jurisdiction, whether these charges could have been made, etc., or whether this whole thing has been maneuvered and, planned for a particular thing. Those are matters which will be established at the trial. But the basic thing is that if 1 and 5 is not there, then how do you go ahead with the trial on this count? Okay,
I'm going to ask you a very a question that I don't know what is going to be your response, because it's also very conflicting kind of opinion that the world at this point of time has. Do you think is United States of America under the current Democratic administration playing a super cop, being the unilateral judicial authority over all that is happening across the globe, whether it is the truth that they are following or some false implications?
See, if it's a legal question, my answer would be that government is a continuous process. Whether A comes or B comes, whether it is democratic or republic, government is a continuous process. So the process of the government can follow. But this is basically, you will need a political opinion, which I am not very qualified to give.
Okay. So should an Indian prosecutor find any company and then end up linking Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, who is now accused of corruption and has colluded with the Chinese, and that has been proven, and then prosecute him in India and send summons from here?
Yeah, see, that's probably provided something, has happened in India. If something has happened in India, you can't do it across.
Yeah.
Now, probably the US court is doing it, or the US system of justice is doing it. They feel that there are investors in US in the Adani company. And therefore, based on that, it's a far-fetched, stretching of jurisdiction, which is something unknown to law. And your question is absolutely right. Can the Indian courts and Indian police department do it, against Biden's son?
Yeah.
So that will have no end. The serious trials in a court of law are not to be done on such kind of gimmicks.
So do you think this comes across as something farcical, what has happened with the indictment that has happened against Adani group of companies?
See, if you ask me, this is something which is bit out of the ordinary. It's not in the normal course. So this is not experienced herein before also. Just because we have investors in one company, that state itself goes and files a complaint about some bribery taking place in some other state. That too in a different, this one only.
Yeah, and the fact that they were not even alluded that the bribery has taken place. There has been a conspiracy.
No. It's just
been a conspiracy to allegedly bribe.
54-page
Yeah.
54-page document does not mention anybody who was bribed, when he was bribed, why he was bribed, how he was bribed, what is the bribe amount. Nothing is mentioned.
Now, regardless of the obvious hit job that is taking place, many will reasonably say that the charges like these are serious. But what would be the pro forma for any Indian investigation which would have to order it to be?
No, Indian investigation is provided there are complaints filed across here. Just because US Department of Justice starts something, their proceedings based on their own understanding, that doesn't mean that the Indian authorities have to be proactive and follow them in their own thing. Somebody can, today we have courts of law here, we have a strong regulatory mechanism here, we have high courts and Supreme Courts and so many other courts which are taking, cognizance day in and day out. We have a much better system than the US system. So anybody can go here and indict whoever you want to. But based on the US thing, which is such a hollow thing, I mean, it's not possible to prosecute people here in this country based on that.
Advocate Nankani, also, a few months ago, there was a very strong statement that had caused concern within the Indian administration and the Indian judiciary, talking about the US government, the US State Department hoped that the judiciary, the Indian judiciary was free and unbiased and fair in hearing and passing judgment on the trial of Arvind Kejriwal. This was right at the time of the Lok Sabha elections were taking place. Do you think if the US government, the State Department has any locus standi in making such commentary?
It doesn't have any, this one, the Indian judiciary, has such a great history. Our country, our system, and especially the judiciary in India is such a robust system. And we have such a strong regulatory mechanism. We have a written constitution. We follow in accordance with the constitution. We have our checks and balances. We don't require the certificate from the US Department or US administration for this.
Right. Absolutely.
And for that matter, Indus Valley civilization is the oldest in the world. Next to that is the Greek civilization. We are more than 5,000 years old. America was not there that time at all.
Okay, talking about the US judiciary acting like a super cop and going about unilaterally passing judgments and indicting Indian companies and bringing about a bad name to the India growth story, let's also take a look at the number of charges that have been raised by the US President-elect Donald Trump, and he's spoken about a number of these district attorneys and public prosecutors, and they've primarily been from Georgia and New York, and he's spoken about how there has been a hit job against him and how there has been collusion, there have been conflict of interest, there have been there was this Fannie Willis, he's spoken about Letitia James, he's spoken about Breon Peace, and these have these individuals, these district attorneys and public prosecutors have been in some way in the past linked to George Soros. So what do you make of these charges that have been raised, not just by anybody, but the the President of America, who is going to take oath in January?
This is something which will require a very detailed investigation. As you mentioned, it is possible that the allegations made against George Soros and the deep state, etc. It is all possible that there is a deep conspiracy somewhere. And today people have a tendency to embarrass people holding high positions in life. So my Mr. Adani's targeted probably is that he is perceived to be close to the administration, the government of India, especially the Prime Minister and all. So this is only because of that these kind of things are being done.
Okay, all right. Advocate Nankani, stay on with me. Let me get in my other panelists into the discussion. I have with me Dr. Sharad Kohli. Dr. Sharad Kohli, it's unfortunate. There was a $10 billion investment that was going to be announced by Gautam Adani right ahead of the indictment that came forth from the public prosecutor from the New York Department of Justice. How do you make of these developments, particularly with regards to the fine print in the 54-page document, which has no locus standi in accusing the Adani group of companies or Gautam Adani or Sagar Adani of actually bribing Indian government officials?
Good evening, Megha. Good evening to my fellow panelists and NewsX viewers. What you say as locus standi, in the legal language, we call it as the jurisdiction. If a crime is committed in Bengal, it cannot be tried out here in Delhi. there are jurisdictional issues within the country. And when it comes to cross-border, obviously there is no locus standi. And let me just give you a little background of how it comes. There is a Hague Convention signed in 1965. There is a mutual legal assistance treaty signed between the India and United States. As for both, if you have to accuse somebody in another country, you have to write to the US has to write to its foreign secretary. Foreign secretary will send it to the Indian embassy. The Indian embassy will then communicate it to the foreign Ministry of External Affairs in India. Ministry of External Affairs will then pass it on to Home Ministry or the relevant department. Now, this is the protocol to be followed. If a US court directly sends a summon or a notice or an indictment to an Indian citizen who's staying in India, it has got absolutely no locus standi. I'm surprised and shocked as to how that US court did not bother to look into the Hague Convention 1965 and the Mutual Legal Assistance called MLA, the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, which is signed between India and US. That is the protocol which they have breached actually. So it has got absolute, can be thrown in the bin
again, as per this document and the indictment that has been put up against the Adanis, the substratum of the case is that you have induced the people of America to subscribe to your bonds without informing them that you are indulging in bribes to get contracts in India. Does this when you talk about, does this evidence, does this substratum actually hold water?
Well, in legal terminology, Megha, we use a term, this is based on conjectures and surmises. That's the term we use when you file a case, that this is simply based on a concocted story. Where is the proof? As Mr. Nadkarni said as well, and I'm so glad, when this vindication came from the Department of Justice in US today morning, I did a brief interaction with your channel, that NewsX was amongst the first channels, even just after reading the 54-page indictment, we were amongst the first people to say that this is a cock and bull story. I'm so glad that Department of Justice, United States has vindicated that stand, that on account number 1 and 5, it does not hold true, and I agree with Mr. Nadkarni that if 1 and 2 is not applicable, 2, 3, 4 become redundant. So basically, the whole case has been ruled out. It's been thrown out of the bin. There were people talking about mega investigation being done in India. So many noises coming from the opposition, from the Congress, and so many other fronts as well. There is no need for that. Within the US, Department of Justice has refuted all these charges. So I think the case it's an open and shut case. There is no substantiated evidence to prove, as he rightly said, who gave the bribe, who was the person giving the bribe, on the basis of encrypted messages. The other day I was saying, I think Mr. Adani must be carrying a camera on his ear and a hearing device. Somebody was listening out there in America. What is he chatting with people out here? What kind of technology is this? I don't think Mr. Adani will ever like to carry something like so. This is completely based on conjectures and surmises, Megha. It has got no substance in it whatsoever.
Gautam Mukherjee, let's also try to understand the kind of losses that the Adani group of companies has had to bear. We talk about Fitch, we talk about S&P rating companies who have downgraded Gautam Adani. There have been billions of dollars that have been removed from the stocks of all the listed companies of the Adani group of companies. Not to mention, there have been a number of contracts that had been signed between Adani and other companies in Bangladesh, in Kenya, and now we're getting to know that something of this sort has also happened with Sri Lanka, and questions are being raised. They've decided to step back. Who is going to be held accountable for this?
Well, this is hit job number 3, as I've said before. The 2 Hindenburg and now this, and it's amazing how quickly it is unraveling. First of all, it's unsubstantiated. It is just a rant of unproven and allegations without any detail. Who was bribed, when he was bribed, as a number of the other panelists have pointed out, that the principal people who are being affected in the stock market and in raising money and so on, Adani and his son and his family and others close to him. All of these people are not at all responsible for this hit job. And it is very clear that it will be a matter of days before they bounce back stronger than ever. And it is very, astounding as to what they expected to achieve.
But also, let's not downplay this, because it has taken more than a year for Gautam Adani and his group of companies to actually go back and bounce back from the kind of losses that it faced after the Hindenburg hit job. So it's going to take, if not more, about a year for the company to bounce back from the downgrading, from the attacks that have been levied against them, and again, besides that, the contracts that have been lost and are not going to be recovered.
Well, what happens is, one lot downgrades and another lot upgrades. One lot says all of this is very serious. Another lot says this is to be dismissed. This is what has happened before, and this is what is happening now. And so, if you stretch this sort of line too early in 2025, this will be another failed hit job, and Adani will come back stronger than ever. So, there's nothing permanent about this. This is a attempt to tarnish the image and the reputation of one of India's most prominent business groups, and in the in the hope that it will also damage the government of India. Both are going to come out unscathed, and this methodology itself is so shoddy in the way it goes about it, that as soon as it's put under scrutiny, it starts to fall apart.
Okay.
And that is what is happening within a day or two.
Mithali Nikore, let's understand from you about the situation at hand and how can it be best dealt with by the Adani group of companies. Of course, their counsels are going to be fighting the case in the New York Court of Justice. But can there be action taken by the Indian government? Can there be action taken by SEBI? Can there be action taken by the Indian securities regulators?
No, absolutely. And thank you so much for bringing me into the discussion. I think, at one point, of course, we may say, on the legal side, that the charges have no basis and, all of these points which other panelists have made. However, from the economic point of view, and as an economist, I'd like to point out that the economic damage and financial damage that the firm has suffered, and if it is proven that these charges were false and they are dismissed, then there is a case for actually defamation. Because if you think about it, the name of the company, the brand of the company has taken, a hit. And the Andhra Pradesh government has actually said that they are reconsidering, renegotiating, and in fact, they are looking at the actions of the previous administration, and they might even, drop this contract. So there's a significant and true loss, financial loss, that the company has borne in terms of the stock market value, which is, some may say a notional loss, but also real losses in terms of deals being lost. So at the end of the day, there has to be some action even taken from the company's side, against people who are putting these allegations. And of course, the Indian government and SEBI do have it within their remit to launch an investigation. Particularly, SEBI can launch an investigation if they so desire, and if they think that, there is a calculated move towards, picking up a few Indian companies and then, creating these kind of allegations again and again.
Right, absolutely. Mithali, also, let's figure out the India growth story. Do you think it is going to be under the Trump administration, after he takes oath in January, that situation can ameliorate our trade ties and diplomatic relations between the two countries would see an upswing?
I definitely expect this, because if we look at the kind of growth that India has seen, despite all of the backlash that's coming from a number of countries around the world, when we actually have a supportive US administration, we can really expect to see a lot more trade ties, a lot more cooperation on technology, a lot more cooperation on fintech and finance and renewable energy also. Even though this president may or may not agree about phasing out coal, he definitely has an advisor in the form of Elon Musk, who believes in renewable energy and who believes in new technologies. And this is exactly India's strength. So as a partner, India can do a lot with the US, and it's time for the two countries to work much more closely together. I really hope that the new administration will put, mechanisms in place for skill training to happen together and to bring the countries together.
Okay, on that note, I'm out of time. I thank all of you for joining me on the telecast. There's big breaking development. Let's shift our